Hello! I'm going to risk being a little gauche today and talk about money. I think that Lisa and I both are very aware of the fact that costuming and making clothes that aren't necessarily for every day is an extreme privilege, but I do also like to compare those costs to what these clothes would have cost people at the time, and also kind of try to put it into some context. And along the way I'm going to share with you the patterns that I used, and the patterns that Lisa used, and the fabrics that we used, and what everything cost. So we're going to start with the very first question is time, right? Your time is valuable, my time is valuable, Lisa's time is valuable, but I'm not going to attempt to even guess how much time went into this project. Instead, I'm going to leave the time as like, it's time sewing. It means I didn't sew something else, whatever. Lisa started the first petticoat for this project in June of 2019. So this has been going on for a little over 4 years, which is actually, it sounds a little bit nuts, but of course we did it among a lot of other things too. And I kind of liken it to a trousseau. If you were starting from scratch as a young lady or a young woman, you would necessarily have a little more to do than once you're established in life. Maybe you get a new dress every season, maybe you get a new dress every year, maybe you remake an old dress every year, and that's how you have enough clothes to be fashionable and to be happy with how you look. And realistically, we're still not finished. Even after the July 1st event, I made the overskirt for this outfit, and then I also still want at least a hairpiece, probably at least one more hat, and a reticule, and maybe a parasol if it looks like I'm going to be doing more outdoor events in the sun. For the winter, I'm going to need a cloak or some other winter wear because, Minnesota's cold. So there is going to be still more to come, and as a treat, I probably will make some sort of silk outfit from the same time period because I love it. So just assume, so I've assumed that you have, time. And then I did also have some accessories already, like the jewelry that I wore for the event. I've had that for 15 years. I don't remember what it cost. I got it at essentially a flea market in South Dakota. So, it's one of those things where that's just a part of my dress-up box and has been for quite a while. So it isn't really entering the equation in terms of the cost of this project. And I'm going to assume that you have a machine that works well, and all the thread you will ever need, and all of the sewing needles you will ever need, and your thimble and everything else. So this doesn't involve setting up a sewing room in any way, although of course we all know that setting up your sewing room and maintaining it is also not something that you get for free. So let's just take that as read. Also, twill tape, muslin, and pattern paper, pencils, things like that. I have not attempted to account for those in this video. It's just, I can't think of a good way to do it, so I'm just skipping over all of that, assuming that in the same amount of time in my sewing life I would have used the same amount of all of that stuff. So this project, again, is just standing in for making a modern dress that I'm going to wear more on a daily basis. So we start with the petticoat combination. Lisa and I did buy this one, and I have the price in these notes. The pattern, I didn't find an exact pattern for this exact thing, but you could take truly Victorian 105 and make some very small adjustments and end up with the same garment. And then I estimated how much fabric you would need, and basically brings the cost, if you made it, down to about $64. The corset was also purchased from Red Threaded, and it was almost $400. Now, fortunately, they do sell the pattern for that corset and a supply kit that includes most of your supplies. You would still need a couple of other tools and a fabric for the outer layer of the corset if you want to copy this exact corset. and an awl, and the grommet setter, and that's kind of the very movable factor in this. A grommet setter can be as simple as basically something you hit with a hammer, and they typically cost a little bit less than $30, or you can get a more robust grommet setter that works more like a press, and those are typically closer to $90. So if you made this corset yourself, and again, assuming that you have the time, energy, and stick-to-itiveness to get it done, you could bring that cost down to between $161 and $224. Lisa chose to do the travel bustle for this project, and it's actually a super efficient, effective way of getting started in this silhouette. Bustles can be quite expensive, and in fact I actually have plans to make a bigger, nicer wire one, and I think that project will end up costing me about $100. But this was very easy. Lisa made it. The pattern is only $7, and she says all the supplies cost her about $30, so it was a total of about $37. Petticoats are where the patterns again really start to shine. Lisa used Truly Victorian 170. The pattern costs about $15, and she said that the red dot petticoat, the fabric for that, cost $90. The plaid cotton cost about $60, and then there's also one you guys haven't seen yet, which is a 2-layered fancy red plaid silk with a red polished cotton, and that altogether was about $184 in materials. So as you can see, wide range in costs based on the fabric that you use for your petticoat, and yeah, so once you have your pattern, you're pretty much good to go based on how much you want to spend on fabric. Finally, something I made, the corset cover. Pattern cost about $14. It's 2 yards of poplin cotton. It was about $20. And for the interfacing, I used just small pieces of silk organza left over from other projects, bringing that total to $34. The dress overall was made with 10 yards of homespun at $15 a yard, although Lisa did get it at a discount. So $150 for the fabric, 5 yards of cotton sateen for the lining, that was $52.50. The bodice pattern cost $17.50. I used a book for the skirt and the overskirt pattern. The whole book was $28. Buttons were $4. And then I used about 1.5 yards of silk organza for the back of the overskirt, and that was $15, bringing the total to about $267. Lord & Taylor advertised a checked dress in their catalog in 1870, and they say that it cost $16, which in today's money, according to a calculator I found online, which may or may not be correct, would cost $372.65 today. So total is actually a savings based on the amount of money it cost for the actual outer dress, not any of the undergarments. So this total trousseau in fabric with just one non-silk petticoat and without accounting for any of the other supplies is about $480.50. The total trousseau in the patterns, so if you're just buying the patterns, you already have all the fabric or someone's gifting you fabric or who knows, is about $121. Now I realize that's higher than it has to be because I personally love paper patterns and I'm willing to pay a little more for them. Even from some of the vendors that I use, if you used a PDF version instead, you could save a lot of money. You could also use books to gather most, if not all, of this information. But I try to feel, when I buy a pattern, if it's a good pattern, I feel I'm also really buying a sewing lesson and sometimes a history lesson, and ideally a sewing history lesson. So even if you are self-taught, please try to remember that your education is worth paying for. And even though I didn't try to total it all up, my time is still worth something. And if a pattern is well drafted and it's from a source that I trust, one of the things I'm paying for is saving my own time, not having to do 2 or 3 or 4 muslins to get the fit right, not having to check the true on the seams. Basically, hopefully being able to pull it right out of the packet and just use it and just be happy with it. And that's something that I'm willing to pay more for, because that's a skill that I kind of have, but that I don't completely have yet. So instead, I'm going to pay someone else to do a little bit of that effort. So the question always becomes, in 2023, can you save money sewing your own? And the answer to me unequivocally for both historical and modern sewing is yes. If nothing else, I'm getting a higher quality product, I'm learning something, and I'm getting, hopefully, the fit that I want, and being able to choose all of the little details that go into a project is something that matters to me. Starting from scratch with any kind of hobby is always going to be more expensive than once you're established. If I repurchased all of the bras even in my lingerie drawer at once, it would completely blow my clothing budget for probably a few months. So keep that in mind when you're considering, is this too expensive for me? You don't have to do it all at once, and maybe you probably don't have time to do it all at once anyway. So take your time, relax, start from the skin out if you want, or start from halfway, start with a petticoat, start with the project that appeals to you the most, and then hopefully you can get by, beg borrowing, or even, assuming that you're going to trade up later in quality for some of your undergarments. Believe it or not, Lisa and I did save money in a few ways. Lisa bought the corset and the main fabric when they were on discount, so she did not pay full price for them. I lined the front of my overskirt with leftover fabric and also pieced the heck out of my overskirt, so I didn't need to buy any more fabric for that part. Otherwise, I probably could have used another couple yards of fabric, so that saved a little bit of money there. My corset cover buttons were just mismatched odd buttons from my button jar that I also bought at a textile center garage sale. Now, if I had been sewing for a long time, or if I were the kind of person who saved a lot of buttons, then I wouldn't even need to buy them from the garage sale. But as it was, that's a very, very cost-effective way to get buttons, especially if you don't care if they match or not. I did use muslin, and I checked everything as well as I could to reduce waste, which included shortening my skirt, which saved me about half a yard of my green fabric. And because even with piecing, the overskirt would not have been possible without that savings in fabric. Muslin isn't free, but because the pieces for this project are so big, it will be easy to reuse it for other projects. In fact, when I muslined the corset cover, I didn't want to do it with muslin. I wanted something a little bit softer, so I used a white shirting, and I've already reused the back of that muslin to be part of a lining for a different project, so I'm not counting that as part of that fabric cost. Polly could have done a few other things to save money, assuming she was able to keep clothing in good condition through the 1860s. And there's kind of a break in history there because of the Civil War. We can't guarantee or assume that people were able to keep their material assets together through that time period. A lot of people in Indian country were refugees, ended up in refugee camps. A lot of them lost everything that they ever had during the war and were really starting from scratch. We don't know what Polly and her family did. We assume they left the area of the mill during the war itself, but we don't know if they were in a refugee camp or if they simply relocated to another town or what they did. But I really don't want to lay odds on if she had her old dresses from before the war to work with, but if she did, she definitely could have saved a lot of money by, for instance, using an old dress as a lining, or turning a skirt from an old dress into a petticoat, or simply remaking an old dress into the new style to save money. Petticoats definitely could have been made over from 1860s style petticoats. The bodice of the dress, as I said, could have been lined with an old dress. So there were lots of options there if she was able to keep some of her material goods from before the war. Polly also routinely would have kept old buttons, so she wouldn't have necessarily had to purchase buttons for a new dress. And also, I didn't have a historical reason to underline the back of my overskirt with silk organza, but I don't like starch, and I just wanted it to have a little bit of nice stiffness to it. I really don't think that she would have done that. I think that if she wanted her fabric to have a little more oomph, she would have just starched it in the process of washing it. So my potential budget for Polly, if she just made the outside of this dress, I do think she maybe would need a new bustle, and Montgomery Ward in their 1875 catalog advertised for one that's only 25 cents. And 10 yards of fancy plaid fabric would be $27.50, bringing the total in 1870-ish to $27.75. In modern money, according to an online calculator I used, this would be approximately $694. So, you know, that's a lot of money. It's a big investment. It's part of why people didn't have closets and closets and closets of clothes back then. Clothing was expensive, even if you made it yourself. I will link in the show notes to everything I talked about in this, and I will also link to some other videos from other costumers about cost. And note about Polly and patterns. She probably wouldn't have necessarily needed patterns for everything. But Godey's Ladies Book or Harper's Bazaar would have been a way for her to stay on top of the trends, and they often did have patterns included with them. So she would have had a way to draft a new style of bodice for herself, and she would know what kind of skirt shapes were becoming popular in the early 1870s. And that's it. Thank you so much for coming along with me to this time period.